Thank you very much. And third time's the charm. I managed to finally share my screen, and hopefully you see my presentation in presentation mode.
Yes, it's a right screen, and I can hear you quite well. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to share a few thoughts about a topic that has been close to my heart for longer than I want to admit. I prepared a presentation. I wanted to say brief, but that's definitely a lie, about some of the experiences that I've made over the last very many years using system dynamics in the context of food system challenges. And let me dive right into it. So I'm a geographer, but I have a master's degree in geography and a PhD in agricultural economics. And while doing my PhD, I kind of fell face forward into system dynamics, and have since kind of pursued this double interest of looking into the challenges of food systems and how we can use and leverage system dynamics to tackle the complexity of food systems. And when I talk about the complexity of food systems, what I mean is that we're never just looking at food system outcomes, irrespective of how we define them. They can be defined as, you know, some indicators of food security, but there's also always something happening in terms of social welfare related to food and to environmental welfare. But these food system outcomes, they don't happen in isolation. They are a result of food system activities like the production of food, processing and packaging of food, distribution and retailing of food, and the consumption of food. And in turn, these food system outcomes and the food system activities, they feed back and change the drivers that determine how food system activities are performed and implemented and how food system outcomes come about. And in this vast field of food system activities, global environmental change drivers, socioeconomic drivers, food system outcomes, we have a whole bunch of fields that all try to frantically come up with the one silver bullet solution to food system challenges. And these solutions, they range from solutions in the consumption space, in the domestic market space, in the food production and supply space, a little further detached in the poverty alleviation space, human health and nutrition space, or climate change, energy and natural resource management space. And of course, everybody is right, but everybody doesn't get it entirely, because we know that what we see here is a complex system characterized by multiple feedback loops spanning across these big systems, but also happening within the smaller subsystems. And so really what I've been looking into for a long time is how can system dynamics tools and techniques support transformation processes in food systems? And I very optimistically selected 3 case studies that hopefully illustrate some of the ways in which system dynamics can support such transformation processes, but also some of the caveats that we observe or that we have to take into account while doing this. So let me try not to babble for too long and jump into case study number 1, which is the most recent case study that we're actually still working on, and that we're performing within the context of a big EU project that looks at integrated assessment models, so more climate change and mitigation of climate change. And our work within this EU project is specifically on explicitly representing human behavior in some and behavior change in some of the most environmentally impactful behaviors. What I'm talking about here is kind of the pilot study where my brilliant PhD candidate Jefferson Raja developed a modeling framework for looking into behavioral change that he applied to the issue of dietary behavioral change, and specifically the question of how we can move away from the consumption of a lot of animal products towards more plant-based diets. It's not a study of how can everybody become vegan, but it's about the question of what makes people consume a certain amount of food, and within that amount of food, what drives the share of animal products into total consumption. So this is really the first integrated assessment model that represents behavioral change fully endogenously, in the sense that there is information taken from other systems, such as land use and agriculture, from the climate module, from the demographic module, and from the economic model, but also that the choices in this behavioral change module feed back into all these sectors. They feed back into land use and agriculture, they feed back into demographics, and they feed back into the economy. So the way we went about developing this behavior change framework was that we started with a qualitative model that systematically integrates and maps diverse sources of knowledge to represent the drivers of meat consumption and the key feedback relationships in this consumption domain. And what we mean with diverse sources of knowledge is one source is existing behavioral theories and frameworks. Another source is existing literature that talks to the issue. And then we also conducted a series of participatory modeling workshops with a fairly diverse range of people to understand the lived experiences of people. And you'll see in a minute why that is important, because the theory they talk about fantastic things such as personal norms and stuff. Who knows what that is? So this qualitative model then, through structural abstraction and formalization, got turned into a quantitative model, and is now used for policy analysis. What I'm presenting here is really more the model itself and the kind of the behavior space that it gives rise to, but not so much yet the specific policy analysis. And here's a high level overview of the behavior change module. And you already see that there are a lot of fancy terms, but what we're actually interested in is on the
I think we lost sound. Birgit, you're muted.
I cannot unmute her.
Oh, okay. Now I saw, was I muted? How long have I been muted?
A minute or so.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that you that you read that you saw how we integrate different sources of knowledge into first a qualitative model and then a quantitative model, and this here is an overview of the behavior change module, where we look at the drivers of the desired per capita consumption of animal products. And what you see here in the different colors is, well, first of all, the product that we want to consume needs to be accessible. Accessible in the sense that it needs to be produced, and also that it needs to be affordable because of economic reasons. And then there are other drivers. There is a driver called descriptive norm and another driver called personal norm. What descriptive norm means is really just, what do others do? Am I the only one who is thinking about transitioning towards more plant-based products, or is this becoming is this becoming a norm that I don't have, where I don't have to encounter so much resistance to follow it? And the third main driver is something that's called personal norms. And that's really essentially a function of this is what I feel like I have to do. Because, for example, I perceive a consumption risk related to the overconsumption of animal products. I perceive a health risk. Or I perceive climate change risks because there are climate impacts that I relate to, among other things, the consumption of animal products and the resulting greenhouse gas emissions. It's maybe important to mention that in the other integrated assessment models out there, that the average food consumption is entirely a function of GDP per capita. So it's entirely a function of how much food can I afford and how much animal products can I afford. And this is so this model here does not just represent the availability and accessibility of animal products, but it also represents some of the more behavioral considerations related to this decision. And we will see that this has quite important implications. On this slide here, we compare for the historical time period. So for the time period between 1980 and 2020, we compare the statistical data that is available for some of these indicators that we saw on the previous slide, and the simulation runs. Here we differentiate between a black line that's called the EMB default run. That's the endogenous model behavior default run, or the base run for our model. And blue is the GDP driven default run, which is the base run for a model that does not include the personal norms or the descriptive norms, just the GDP as a driver of meat and food consumption. And we see for both model formulations, there's a pretty good fit between historical data and the simulation. But when we now move into the future and project model behavior into the future, we see quite a big difference between the black and grayish confidence interval and the blue confidence interval that represents the model formulation, where food consumption is entirely a function of GDP per capita. So maybe just to illustrate the massive difference between the two models, an existing formulation like we find it in existing integrated assessment models, where food consumption is entirely a function of GDP per capita, will lead to some 4,000 to a per capita daily calorie consumption of about 4,000 calories per person per day. I'm going to say that I don't believe that. That's probably a little optimistic in terms of what people are able to eat. The endogenous model behavior run with the endogenous representation of human behavior is a little less optimistic in terms of what people will eat over the years, and this has implications for the climate. But let's not get overly excited about this. Why I wanted you to see, or at least have a glimpse at this case study, is for a number of reasons. One, this is a global model. It's an aggregated model. It's there are a lot of details that cannot be considered, but I think it's a nice example of how system dynamics can be very useful in integrating different perspectives from different disciplines, from economics, from climate sciences, from psychology, from agriculture, and how it's really important to close relevant feedback loops, because it has massive implications for system behavior. I think it's also a nice example of how system dynamics can provide tools for computational modeling, but without having to sacrifice the inclusion of soft variables such as personal or descriptive norms. And I also listed a link here to the model if you want to explore it in more detail and also test different policy options. So that was my example one when it comes to how can system dynamics be used to study transformation processes in food systems. I'm now moving to a second case study, changing gears completely. This is a somewhat older case study where we used system dynamics to look into the question of resilience of food systems. And resilience really is the question of how much disturbance can a system tolerate before it bends, and how much disturbance can a system tolerate before it not just bends but completely breaks. In this specific case, we looked into food insecurity in Guatemala, a country that is quite dependent on agriculture, and a country that is also characterized by varying levels of food insecurity, and a country that is very much affected by climate change, both in terms of droughts, but also in terms of hurricanes. So the specific questions that we looked into was, we asked the question of how can food affordability become more resistant to droughts. And for this purpose, I want to say we, but really it was Hugo who went through the entire modeling process, conducted a lot of initial interviews with stakeholders in Guatemala, and then went through the entire group model building process where he interacted with stakeholders several times while iterating with behind the scenes modeling activities. The model that he built, here is a high level overview, but I'm going to make it even more high level, is a model that looks into the interactions between the natural system that represents maize yield as a function of nutrients, but also water and soil organic matter. the market system where the price of maize is calculated as a function of supply and demand, and the household system where households make decisions on how they use their revenue for input or for livestock or direct purchases of food. So he calibrated this model for 2 case study regions, and then looked into the resilience of these 2 case study regions to drought. And when we mean what we mean with looking at the resilience to climate change is we were looking at what happened to food affordability, which is this stylized line here, in the face of disturbance. Would it kind of remain stable and not change behavior trajectory? Would it bend but then adapt and bounce back, or would it actually collapse? And for understanding how resilient this system was, we ran the model thousands of times with different magnitudes of the drought, magnitudes and durations of the drought. And what came out of this analysis was, for these 2 case study regions, was a somewhat differentiated picture where we see how much of a reduction in rainfall we need, or the system can tolerate, before we see a change, before we see this curve following more the adaptation path than the stability path. That's the hardness measure. And the elasticity measure is before it drops to the transformation curve. And so, interestingly, what we see is this case study on the upper part of the graph here tolerates somewhat more reduction in rainfall before we see a change in system behavior. But then what I call the window of opportunity here, the adaptation part, where we can still bounce back, is fairly small. Whereas in the second case study, we see changes a little earlier, but there is much more flexibility before the system completely collapses. And why is that? Why is that? This is system dynamics at its best, I would say. Structure drives behavior. In the case study that has a little more flexibility, that's a case study that has where farmers not only do maize farming, but they also have livestock, and so they have some buffer in the case of drought, where they can still make some money from chickens and use that additional money to purchase food. You can do that also. You can do the same analysis for testing the how different policies increase these different windows. And there again, you will see that what increases the resilience most is really things that change the structure of the system. So one of the most effective policies was to introduce buffer food reserves, which provides a buffer in times of crisis. So I wanted to rush through this case study because I think on the one hand, this to me is very important. I think system dynamics is super useful when we can use it as an interdisciplinary method for policy analysis and designing complex dynamic systems. But also, I like this case study because it kind of drives home the system dynamics mantra of structure drives behavior. And what I also like about this case study is that it's not about point-to-point predictions. It's not about exactly how many dollars do we have to invest at which point in time, knowing that we had to simplify a lot to get at this aggregated representation of this food system, but that we can use our models to look into tipping point dynamics and into stability analysis, to gain some insights into what reduces the vulnerability of a system and what has maybe some less desired consequences than we thought it would have. I have a third case study,
Birgit?
and I have some conclusions, and I'll fit all of this into the
Birgit,
5 remaining minutes.
You got 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, I got
thanks.
this. So case study 3 is really just a brief anecdote about a project that probably about my most policy relevant project to date. It's a project that we did a couple of years ago within the realms of the Swiss National Science Foundation research program on healthy nutrition and sustainable food production. And I was involved in a project with a couple of other modelers that looked into the trade-offs and synergies between sustainable diets and healthy diets. This project was every modeler's dream. We had this massive work package 4, work package 5, where we built a system dynamics model, an environmentally extended input-output model, a global mass flow model, and looked into all kinds of things related to the sustainability of agricultural production and the health impact of diet. The purpose of the project was to develop science-based knowledge on health and sustainability impacts of diets. We worked a lot with policymakers, consumers, farmers, the food industry, and particularly with the Swiss Society for Nutrition. And again, we built all these models. As modelers, we had the time of our lives just nerding out and comparing notes, what our models can do and cannot do, performing all kinds of analyses. But essentially, we always came back to the one point. So what we did was we looked at the changes in, we looked at how the adoption of healthy diets would change the Swiss food system. So we ran this scenario where we assumed everybody would consume exactly what was recommended by the Swiss Society for Nutrition. And no matter what we did, we always came up with the same results. What the graph here shows is in black how much the consumption changes to the baseline consumption if everybody actually consumes the foods recommended by the Swiss Society for Nutrition. And in gray, we see what gets produced in such a scenario. And I want to point your attention to this one category here, bovine meat. The recommendation is to reduce consumption to almost 50% of what we consume today. And what we see in terms of production is we end up with more than 80% of what is currently produced, which is a huge disconnect, right? There's a huge disconnect between consumption and production. And why is that? I love all these analyses, all these big models. It's a simple stock and flow question about if I have my cows that produce quite a lot of milk, I automatically produce meat, whether I want it or not, because these cows They have to have babies to continue producing milk. So what we did after all these big models was we built this tiny little, non-feedback less simulation model where we just drove home this one link between bovine milk and bovine meat production. Yes, and I think I wanted you to see this because I think there's an interesting balance that we have to find in policy relevant work. On the one hand, we need to really make sure that we have our details covered, but on the other hand, we also need to distill core structures to really illustrate what we mean. I see you, Rob. So I've been doing this for a while now. What have I learned? I've learned that I think system dynamics can be very useful in integrating and synthesizing knowledge across disciplines and policy sectors. What I like is that it has a strong visual component and interactive features. What I don't like is that it's so that people can then immediately critique the hell out of it because it's visible. I also maybe some of the other things. Structure drives behavior. We need to be really clear about the role of uncertainty. It's great that we have scripts for supporting participatory modeling, but I also realized that modelers are really bad at communication. So it's very important to not let modelers talk too much about their models, but people who know their topic and also who know how to talk about these things. And I think the other thing that we need to become much more aware of is when we talk about transformation issues, we need to look more into justice. And not just who gets a benefit and the burden, but how do we involve people in the process? Do they have a voice in the process? And do they have a voice in the implementation of the results? And that also is not so much about models. It's more about the modeling process. So to me, really, if I want to say something today, modeling is never just about models. We're good at doing the modeling, but we need to be much more cognizant about the modeling process. And I apologize for still being too late, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Birgit. I think we can now start